Hello everyone, welcome to Analog IAS Current Affair Analysis for 15th October 2020, and these are the articles we'll be dealing today. The first article for the day is taken from the Hindu and it is titled A Weak Link in the Elementary Education Chain. So if we take a look at various reports, say for example the annual survey of education report that is brought out by the NGO Pratham, we have a lot of evidence that NGOs like Pratham are an active participant in the development of the domain that they are working in. So, in a democracy, civil society and NGOs in particular are a significant partner in the development of that particular domain. So, it also helps the government in bridging the gap between the public and the government in delivering the service in which these NGOs work. For example, the survey reports that are brought out by ASER are considered to be so significant for policy making that they have actually become the modus operandi for a lot of policy inputs to the bureaucrats. So such is the level of NGOs penetration in our country. So we have as many as 31 lakh NGOs in the country, and we have nearly more than 10 lakh NGO workers who are actually catering to the elementary education scene in our country. In this context, how far are we utilizing the services of NGOs and how far are we actually giving an incentive for an NGO to work? That is the central debate of this entire article. So, a survey that was brought out by Economic and Political Weekly Journal estimated that the lowest possible number of NGO staff working for the improvement of quality in elementary education is roughly around 3 lakhs. So this 3 lakhs number include direct volunteers who are teaching on the ground. It can be indirect volunteers who are getting the logistics arranged for the schools in rural areas, or it can also be volunteers who are actually helping the teachers to mobilize resources in the form of materials, or whether it is in the form of technology access. So in one way or the other, these NGOs are serving the needs of the teaching community, and most NGOs and large foundations believe that people work as catalysts and influence the functioning of the system. So whenever we are talking about teachers curriculum and the improvement of efficiency of teachers, we talk about a concept called CPDT, that is continuous professional development of teachers. With changing nature of the society and changing times, it is important for teachers to update their knowledge. And keeping this view in the mind, this idea of CPDT has been proposed, and NGO workers have a very significant part in this CPDT program. If you take into consideration, there will be a annual in-service training and pedagogy improvement workshop that will be conducted for teachers. So in conducting these workshops, we can definitely leverage the speciality and expertise that is brought by NGOs. So these NGOs become a very central aspect in our ensurance of quality in the education sector. For example, the article quotes a dilemma. What is the highest objective of education at school level, whether it is board marks or improving the value system of the kid? Now, in a practical world, we would obviously pick up board marks because that would decide the future economic prospects of the child. But if the pedagogy involves severe punishment to score marks or harassment of the kid, is that an ideal that we have to embrace? Because if we are too focused on the end result and not on the process, like say for example punishment, is that a value proposition that we want to give significance to? That is the question that we have to answer. It is the central dilemma that is involved in this very basic example which gives rise to the importance of a good appropriate curriculum and the importance of pedagogy. That is the reason why we have to empower teachers with a proper document which is acting as a framework of principles to impart this education. So value based education is always a good step to go ahead with. In regards to this provision of the framework of principles, we just have to take into consideration the existing documents that are brought out by the government, and we have to stipulate the guidelines based on the directions given in these documents. The first one is the National Curriculum Framework that was brought out in 2005. The second one is the Right to Education Act 2009, and the third one is the National Curriculum Framework for Teacher Education that was again brought out in 2009, and the latest addition to this is the National Education Policy, the new education policy that came out in 2020. So if we take into consideration even the NCF that came out in 2005 and the NCFTE change in the near future, the new documents which will be driven by the National Education Policy 2020 are likely to have much in common with the present ones also. So whatever issues that have stayed in NCF and NCFTE will again continue in one form or the another in NEP. Now, considering the fact that there are as many as 3 lakh NGO workers working in the education sector, it is very important that the alignment of the pedagogy that they adopt should be in tune with the vision laid out in these documents. So it is important for them to understand what is the objective of this teacher development program, and since they are also a part of this program, what are the values that they should focus upon and what are the outcomes. So in this regard, the new education policy has laid down a set of skills that should be focused upon for positive outcomes. So these skills include creativity, nurturing, scientific temper development, focusing on health and nutrition, physical education. You can have a look at this in the annexure of the National Education Policy. But the most important takeaway is, whenever we are talking about teacher education, most of it is based on static content that is taken from sociology, philosophy, and the philosophy of education in particular. But there is hardly any talk about actually empowering these NGO workers who are working in the sector. These 3 lakh empowered NGO workers will have a multiplier effect in the society. However, NGOs do not seem to be paying adequate attention to this very important area, especially given the fact that they are already engaged in educational improvement, because they all have a certain framework of the organization through which they work. So to bring all these NGOs onto a common platform or a common base platform will actually help the government in achieving the objectives of education sector in our country. Let me quote with an example. Say a foundation X believes in a style of pedagogy which involves rote learning. They are driven by the reason that in a rural area like the ones that they are functioning, and when they are serving the rural kids, unless and until they have a shot at higher educations like say for example IITs, they cannot actually change their lives. The only way that generation can imagine to transform their own lives is through getting a seat by hook or crook in IIT and getting a good job. This is the style that this NGO would adapt. Nothing wrong in it because they are being very practical. But there is another NGO with a vast amount of resources but believes in practical thinking. The child need not attain a seat in that IIT, but he will be successful in life. This is the approach with which this NGO would be working. Now, what is the national objective? It is to empower the kid to have a certain number of skills as enlisted in the National Education Policy 2020. Now, unless and until we bring both these kind of NGOs onto a common curriculum or a framework, and also use these NGOs as supplementary resources to help the teacher, that would actually help our government and our country to have a futuristic vision about our education sector. So if we are actually developing the skill set that is required for reaping the demographic dividend, that will be the most economically feasible ideal solution for our education sector. At the same time, we should also focus on our value system. Here is where the government should take a lead role and bring all the stakeholders onto a common platform. That is the gist of this article. The second article for the day is taken from the Indian Express and it is titled The Domestic Market Mirage. Basically, this is about why India should focus on export driven growth. Now, generally in economic stages, there are various stages when we look at history. The first stage of economic activity involves having an agricultural surplus, then the society will eventually move towards industrialization and then into specialized services. But what happened in 1991 is a lot of industries have actually transitioned directly into the service sector. The allocation of resources has been focused on the service sector because it created employment immediately. So a lot of IT companies came into our country and generated the vast IT jobs that we have today. But in the process, what happened is the manufacturing ecosystem has significantly fallen down, and that is the reason why Make in India has been emphasized upon. But there is again another problem. In 2016, Donald Trump became the president of United States. What followed was a trade war which ensured that it had a global effect. This trade war was with China. So his basic proposition was that China was actually taking away a lot of jobs from the workers in US, because China was considered to be the factory of the world. It is still the factory of the world, and the reason why the world is suffering so much in the pandemic is because its close linkage to China. So we have a concept in economics and manufacturing called the supply chain. So a product has various steps at which it will be manufactured. Say a product A, for example, let us consider the iPhone. Previously, there is a manufacturer called Foxconn in China, which has decentralized its production facilities after the COVID pandemic. What happened before the COVID pandemic was that China would source the supplies to the Foxconn company, as in the Chinese suppliers who were situated in the special economic zones where Foxconn is situated, supplied the parts which were required for assembling this iPhone at a very low cost. So this has given the edge to China, and therefore all the countries in the world have situated their factories in the world and significantly brought down the cost. That is the reason why China is called the factory of the world. Now, in the wake of the pandemic, there was a call to decentralize the manufacturing system that were centralized in China, and a lot of economists have actually suggested that India can use this opportunity and replace China. But it is not simply possible. One, because we don't have the resources in the form of either skill set for human beings and money to attract. Thirdly, our governance is a big issue because of the lack of ease of doing business. The emphasis of the government on the ease of doing business is because of this reason, to attract more companies into our country. So the latest labor reforms are also a part of to attract these companies into our country. The other side of the coin is about the strength of our domestic market. India has a population of 130 to 140 crores. So if a company succeeds in just catering to the population and not focusing on exports, that company can still survive and grow. This is the philosophy that a lot of economists have propounded. So that mistook the meaning of Atmanirbharta that was given out by the government as restriction on exports. So the focus should be on domestic market and not the exports. This is the basic logic with which they went. This article is about debunking that myth. We still have to aim to achieve high growth rate by focusing only on domestic demand is a misnomer. It could lead to failure. So this article argues with various proofs as to why we should still focus on export markets. That is the basic backdrop of this article. Now let us look at the details of the article. If we take a look at our GDP formula, it is a sum of our net trade, investments, government expenditure and consumption. Now government expenditure and the consumption patterns are very closely linked. They depend upon our tax revenues. We have seen in the time of pandemic that our GST collections have fallen very drastically. This is because of the lockdown imposed and also because a lot of people have actually lost jobs. So this is the reality. Now unless and until the government decides to pump in money, we cannot expect the economy to grow. Now where does the money for the government come from? The government does not have enough resources. So the other investment avenue that we are looking at is investments. But again, in a business uncertainty, how can you expect companies to come and invest in our country? Say for example, a big multiplex chain wants to open its franchise in our country. But if the country is not in a position to open up because of the lockdown, that would be a very bad investment choice. So a lot of people are not sure about spending, though discretionary spending as they call it, is kind of a spending that does not depend on your basic needs but your discretion. Say if you want to go to a movie and spend money, that would trigger economic growth. But is it absolutely essential? The answer is no. So this kind of discretionary spending is at an all-time low because of the virus and the uncertainty it created. So we cannot expect the domestic demand to meet the growth of our economy. Now what is the other alternative? We neither have expenditure because people don't have money. The government cannot pump in the amount of money required for the growth. Investments are not coming by. The only option left is trade. So this is just a mathematical logic that we can think about for the present times. So this entire article is trying to explain the points that I have just mentioned in various dimensions using statistics and different sectors. As far as the exam is concerned, the major takeaway is the logical understanding of the GDP formula and what can be done alternatively. So it is quite obvious that we have to depend on exports. Now the second question is, what kind of exports? So here is where we can take direct data from the article and say that we have to invest in so and so sectors. So the article focuses on textiles, one of the probable area where we can significantly raise our exports in a shortest possible time. So what we can do for this is eliminate all kinds of tariffs and especially on inputs. There is a problem called inverted duty structure. So what happens for these textile manufacturers is, if they are importing certain raw material, the GST on that will be much higher than the export product GST. So this will lead to export incompetitiveness and reduces the export and also the demand for our product. So these sort of governance issues should be taken by the government, and only then we can expect some positive change. That is the gist of this article.